Welcome back, everyone. If you're still with us after that last segment, then you're either brave or very curious, and maybe both. We've talked about the Wendigo as an external predator, a force in the woods, stalking the lost and the desperate, but now we're moving into even more chilling territory, because what if the Wendigo isn't always out there? What if sometimes it's in here, in us, in our thoughts, in our instincts, in that moment when survival blurs into savagery?
This is where the line between mythology and psychology starts to blur, and where we have to tread very carefully. Because we're not just talking about monsters in the woods anymore, we're talking about what happens to the human mind when it's pushed beyond its limits, and how cultures throughout history have used the Wendigo not just as a cautionary tale, but as a framework for understanding extreme human behavior, particularly in times of famine, isolation, and madness.
And let's be honest, the conditions that birth Wendigo stories, harsh winters, starvation, isolation, desperate choices, those conditions happen. They've happened in the North for centuries, and in those moments, when someone breaks the ultimate taboo and resorts to cannibalism, there has to be a way for a community to understand it, to name it, to make sense of it, and sometimes that name is Wendigo.
Right, and in fact, there's even a documented psychological condition called Wendigo psychosis. It's extremely rare, but it's been recorded historically, particularly in First Nations communities. And it involves an overwhelming craving for human flesh even when other food is available, and an intense fear of becoming a cannibal, like the person feels the monster inside them growing stronger, even if they haven't acted on it yet.
Let me read you this excerpt from a 19th century Jesuit missionary journal written by a priest who served near Hudson Bay. He wrote, "A man came to us crying that the wind had spoken to him, that it whispered hunger into his bones and told him to devour his wife. He wept as he begged us to tie him up, and when we refused, he ran screaming into the trees, and we heard no more of him."
That's what's so disturbing, Mark. It's not just the act itself, it's the anticipation of the act, the mental unraveling, the idea that once the seed is planted in your mind, it grows, it festers, and eventually it consumes who you were.
Which brings us to a truly terrifying case from the early 1900s, the trial of Swift Runner. I was hoping we'd cover this one. So Swift Runner was a Cree trapper and a respected member of his community, a father, a scout for the Canadian Mounted Police. But during the winter of 1878, something went horribly wrong. He came out of the woods alone, rail thin, claiming his family had starved to death, but he didn't look like someone who had been starving. And when the authorities investigated, what they found was straight out of a nightmare: bones, flesh, evidence of cannibalism.
And he confessed, he admitted to eating his wife and children, but what's crucial is how he described it. He didn't just say he was hungry, he said he had been possessed, that the Wendigo had entered his dreams, had crawled down his throat, and made its nest inside him. He said, "The thing that walks in hunger wore my face like a mask, but it was not me."
That line has haunted me since I read it. Wore my face like a mask, the implication that something alien, something ancient, uses us, like we're just skin to be worn while it acts out its hunger.
It's a theme we keep encountering in skinwalker lore, in Wendigo stories, even in shapeshifter myths from other continents. The idea that the human face can lie, can be a disguise for something monstrous, and that sometimes we become our worst nightmare not by choice, but by surrender.
What's fascinating and terrifying is that Swift Runner wanted to be executed. He begged for it. He saw it as the only way to stop what he had become. And that tells us something about how deeply this belief ran, not just in his mind, but in the community around him.
And perhaps how real the transformation was, not in a biological sense, but in a spiritual and psychological one. When you break that deeply with your humanity, when you violate the core taboo, you don't just do something monstrous, you become a monster. And in cultures where spiritual integrity is everything, that's worse than death.
So here's the question that's been buzzing in my head all week. Sarah, what if the Wendigo isn't just a creature or a possession? What if it's a mirror, a reflection of what any of us could become under the right conditions, under the wrong pressures?
That's the most terrifying part, isn't it? The idea that the Wendigo is not an outsider, Not some ancient beast in the trees, but a voice that waits inside each of us, that whispers when we're cold, hungry, desperate, or angry, and that, if we listen too long, it gets louder.
Which brings us to the next chapter, the thin veil between fiction and reality, and what happens when the Wendigo steps into the modern world, into the stories, the media, and the nightmares of people far removed from the boreal forests of its origin.